So let's be honest with each other. Award shows suck these days. They can either get the nominees so right or get them so wrong, and most of the time, the winner is an album no one really conceives as true quality, just popularity. This is evident with the past few years of winners in both the ACMs and CMAs, but one award group that surprisingly is consistent a majority of the time is the Grammys. A majority of the time, even if the winner isn't my personal pick, it's usually an album of high quality. So I thought I'd rank all the past 22 years of winners of the modern age in country music, because a lot of these are some of the most well-crafted, emotionally resonant albums I've ever seen. Please keep in mind, with the exception of two, I like every album on this list, so if an album isn't high enough, don't magically assume I hate it. My list isn't the right list, or even the definitive list. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Disappointment in the game of life. Own the Night is the most boring album imaginable. At least with Need You Now, it was full of absolute bangers, but here, I do not physically emote whatsoever. This is boring by Old Dominion standards. Just a Kiss, the titular track, makes me want to die just so I can feel something. The songs that aren't singles are so lazily produced. There's no emotion. It doesn't feel like something I can invest in, given how much they stick to the safe fundamentals with the chord progressions in the majority of the songs. And the worst part is that this album isn't even worth it. It isn't worth making a music disaster video because I'd keep repeating myself. Every song just repeats the same mistakes. And you had two perfectly good albums to earn this award with Chief and Speak Now. I'd personally pick Chief for its bold risks in the instrumental sphere. What risk is taken here? Absolutely nothing.
Your nose. Breathe through your nose.
If I had to describe Breathe by Faith Hill in one word, is that it is loud. Because dear lord, the production of this album is atrocious. Overshore's biggest problem with All Too Well was that he had percussive issues. That's how I feel on this entire album. Even when it settles, the softer moments are just so boring, and then the bombastic songs just wake you up again. I didn't like this album as a kid, and I sure as hell don't like it now. There is little I find appealing about this record. Breeze is the most overrated country single I've ever seen. It is not good. Stop lying to yourself. I haven't listened to all the other nominees, but I'm willing to bet Under the Influence by Alan Jackson deserves the award. But come on, this is the type of pop country people should be complaining about. Before I continue, I want to say I have nothing but respect for Tanya Tucker. With that said, this album is nothing special. Like, on its own, compared to the rest of the mainstream, this is leaps and bounds ahead of anything in the pop country phase of the industry. But when comparing it to all the albums that won, scratch that, all the nominees it were up against really shows you how there's not much to glance at. The sound of this is really strong, I'll say that. But beyond that, there's nothing to admire vocally, nothing to admire lyrically. It's really just a blank canvas of an album. I do really enjoy the closing track, Bring My Flowers Now. It's a shockingly mature song, but still, compare it to her competition, which do that 90% of the time. You had Desperate Man, one of the boldest risks I've ever seen. Pistol Annie's Interstate Gospel, which absolutely deserved this award. The trio of Pistol Annies get little to no recognition and praise, and it's a darn shame. I mean, it could have been worse. They nominated Centerpoint Road, so in the end, it's fine, I guess. I'll be the first to say, Need You Now is pretty good. Like, talk about an album that receives far too much hate because of where it comes from. The main single, while nothing truly special, overall has a truly exceptional melody. Like, wow, it's a strong hook. It kind of represents the entire album as a whole, which is its own issue, as you can clearly tell this entire album was written around one song. It's basically what a good Old Dominion album looks like. Even though it chases several things in pop sphere, it keeps the hallmarks of country music. You can clearly hear the pedal steel, the fiddle, they aren't buried deep down so they can't call it country. The harmonies on this one are really great. It's not just Hillary Scott and everyone else just turned down. It's a really strong blend. Obviously it didn't deserve it. I mean, look at its competition with Revolution, Up on the Ridge. I'd personally give it to You Get What You Give. It was such a fresh, unique, rootsy interpretation of country music. It's pretty obvious its titular single was the biggest reason it won, but unlike the other albums below this, I'm not really mad, as this was a fresh, intuitive, fun ride of an album.
I'm afraid you won't be able to metal bend that wall, Chief Big Bomb. It's solid platinum.
If you watch the 2014-2015 video, I think you'll know I'm not the biggest fan of Platinum, which is surprisingly shocking as everyone considers it the best of her work, because I consider it her weakest by a long shot. I mean, I still think it's good, but not by much. What really holds this album back is its singles, which aren't anything special. Automatic is the most annoying song ever, don't at me on that. Little Red Wagon has the most irritating vocal delivery of her entire catalog, and her duet with Carrie Underwood, which I haven't listened to for like 5 years up to my re-listen for this video, is easily the worst Miranda song out there, at least to my personal knowledge. But the album cuts? Well, the album covers are amazing. Babies Making Babies is both fun and clever. It's a highly underrated pregnancy song with an insane amount of details. All that's left is such a strong western swing, like yes, more of this. The album as a whole isn't a powerful statement like Revolution or Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. This is just a relatively strong mainstream record from a truly exceptional artist. Her fellow nominees aren't that far off in terms of overall quality, but I'm gonna go with Riser as my pick for the win for how unique it was. It's a perfectly enjoyable album that I just happen to have a few problems with, but in the end, it keeps what makes Miranda Lambert special at its core.
Even if it takes forever! Forever!
You know, on one hand, These Days by Vince Gill has a truly remarkable blend of country, rock, and R&B. On the other hand, this is the most boring experience I've ever had listening to an album because dear lord, 40 songs is ridiculous. I had the absolute hardest time ranking this one because it's not awful whatsoever. By all means, it's a truly exceptional work of art, but considering it as an entire package, it's just not worth it as a whole. When your album is longer than The Dark Knight's runtime, maybe that's a realization that you've gone too far. As for who deserved it, I'm willing to bet Long Trip Alone was the one. It's highly underrated, and even though I ranked it 6 on my Dirks ranking, I think it was more deserving of that coveted trophy. Keep in mind, I did enjoy myself with this album quite a bit, but I cannot find myself listening to the entire album ever again. It's a steady piece of quality with no real dips whatsoever, but there isn't much of an effective range in quality either. If this was a simple 12-track album with some of my favorites like The Rock of Your Love or Cold Grey Light of Gone, then I wouldn't hesitate to put it in the top 10. But come on, are you going to listen to an album that's longer than the lengths of a feature film? Yeah, I thought so.
Let's give a rousing welcome to Mr. Hank Williams.
Would you believe me if I said I had the most mixed feelings about the timeless Hank Williams tribute? I mean, it's Hank Williams, he's one of my all-time favorites, so this should be an instant classic for me, right? Yeah, not quite. I think there was a lot of effort and passion put into this project, but it's such a tonal mess. For a lot of them, they try to reinvent the songs in their own personal music styles, which is an admirable thing to do, but with Hank's type of music, it doesn't truly work. Separately, all the songs are good, I enjoyed them all, but as an overall package, there is no cohesiveness within it. Look at Keith Richards' rendition of You Win Again, and then compare it to Sheryl Crow's version of Long Gone Lonesome Blues. They sound like they came from two separate albums, and I always bump an album down if it is all not original material. I enjoyed it, and it's always nice to see artists of the past and present do a solid dedication to a legend. I remember on my first listen to Miranda Lambert's Wildcard, I thought it was the worst Miranda album yet, but boy did this album grow on me. Once you get past the new production style, the album turns into a surprisingly pleasant experience, because it arguably is the first album in years that recenters the story of Miranda Lambert back to where it should be. On her fun approachability and sassiness, trust me, it's not a stale pop record. There's a lot of great writing moments on Settling Down, Tequila Does, and Dark Bars. So many clever cuts. I will say, I'm not the biggest fan of Bluebird. I think it's pretty overrated. I know, harass me in the comments about that. But yeah, even though it was a vast departure from her previous work musically, it's a complete return to form in the delivery and writing. I think there was a lot of reasons why it earned its Grammy, but I will forever be salty Never Will didn't win. It's one of the most underappreciated albums of the modern age. But it's fine, as this album was well worth the wait.
You're cancelled. Cancelled. I'll tell you what's cancelled.
Surprisingly, Taking the Long Way was the only Dixie Chicks album I had yet to listen to prior of this ranking. I will say, this album is more of a statement rather than a tour de force compared to other Dixie Chick albums that won, but I will say this, it is a powerful message. After being cancelled, this is basically saying they don't care, they will keep doing what they are doing and don't give a crap. And it isn't them being high and mighty, they do have some minor regrets, not of themselves, but of those who were hurt because of them. That's a really selfless theme. But if a middle finger is what you're looking for, then look no further than Not Ready to Make Nice. And it's also a farewell, as they are in a symbolic and literal sense accepting their exile from country music, as they didn't make a new album for over a decade. One of my absolute favorite aspects of the album is that constant theme. It's one of the more consistent albums in that aspect. It experiments in new avenues of musical styles for modern country, and it works so great. I wouldn't necessarily say they went out with a bang, it's a more bright visible bonfire from the distance, but nonetheless it was fantastic. The nominees weren't that great overall, and I think it absolutely deserved its win.
Wait a minute, accidents can happen.
Dad, we're not going to kill this chicken.
Despite being a massive dip in quality from his debut album, From a View Volume 1 still manages to hold its own. It's a far more folksy album compared to Traveler and less bombastic vocals. It's more about the tenderness of Chris Stapleton's voice. Broken Hail is being a clear example of that, which is one of the most beautiful Stapleton songs out there. The clarity and richness of it is unparalleled. And it doesn't stop there, it just keeps building in the quality with the following track, Last Thing I Needed, First Thing This Morning. Focuses on the more little details in life and how they can hurt continually. Look at Sometimes I Cry, which is Stapleton pushing his vocal power to the limit. This is the inverse. One big issue I will say this album has is its pacing. It's a 9-track album and it feels like it's trying to say so much in so little time. And I'm sitting here wondering, what is the theme? What is the point of this album existing? And it doesn't really answer that question. But I let it slide as it's such a differing perspective than of what came before, and its competition was not great to say the least. There is so much to adore when it comes to Same Trailer, Different Park. But this album isn't automatically a masterpiece because it has 2 phenomenal songs. Okay, let me rephrase that. All the songs are great, but it really is the simplest of all the albums in terms of its stories, hence why I think it's easily the weakest of the trilogy of the Casey albums. It had no way in hell of topping Pageant Material, and I give Golden Hour a slight edge for its unique tone. I know we all come for Follow Your Arrow and Merry Go Round, but no one ever talks about Dandelion, one of the most unique and story-driven Casey songs. It's so weird with its melody and tone, and it has never gotten the love it deserves. Overall, if I had to sum up this album, it's a far more descriptive version of Platinum, but I still enjoyed myself quite a lot with this album. I mean, look at what came out at the same time. As for whether or not it deserved the dub, I prefer Red by Taylor Swift. But in the end, it's a fun, wholesome experience that I have a lot to say about in the future. Fly was the hardest Dixie Chicks album to rank, as I didn't know exactly where to put it. The highs of this album are as high as they can be, but on the other hand, it's not necessarily the most memorable, at least for me. Which is weird, as the most iconic songs came out between this time, with Cowboy Take Me Away being one of the most notable in their catalog. I remember what actual country music sounds like with songs like that. Goodbye Earl is as funny as everyone says, it's so good. But I don't know man, this one didn't click with me as well as others, and I already like this album a lot. It's basically the original version of Gaslighter with a far more rootsy tone. It checks off all the marks I expect from the Dixie Chicks. Fantastic harmonies, a strong blend of sincerity with Heartbreak Town, and rowdiness with Hole in My Head. It's still Dixie Chicks at the end of the day, and they are phenomenal.
I don't pray much anymore. Lord, it's all troubadours.
Oh, I was dreading this moment. I wasn't ready to say this for a while. Number 10 is George Strait's Troubadour. I know this is one of the most beloved country albums of the modern age, but this is the most overrated country album I've ever seen. I grew up with this album same as you, but there isn't anything actively compelling. There's nothing new. It's just George Strait making a relatively strong country album. And it still works. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And this isn't me attacking George Strait. I have nothing but respect for this man who paved his own way. But I have a far more emotional investment in albums above and even below. All the songs are solid. I enjoy them all quite a lot. But I'm not moved by any of it. It's just incredibly strong, safe country music. Unlike Casey Musgraves, I'll take those sweet, buttery vocals of George Strait any day. The delivery here is really strong. Despite all the problems it has, Troubadour is one of only a few albums I can listen to endlessly and never get bored. I honestly didn't expect me ranking it this high. On its own, Fearless is nothing truly special. In fact, it's way down there on the songwriting spectrum, but Fearless has something that not a single album on this list has. It's powerful nostalgia. This album is full of waves, tsunamis full of nostalgia in its vocal delivery, instrumentals, and production. It's just a 2000s nostalgia machine. The melodies on this one are so strong, it's just bop after bop, and even then, there are some actual exceptional moments. Love Story, despite all the cheesiness, is an extremely well-paced, well-told story of a song. Easily one of the strongest story-driven songs of the 2000s. There's simply just magic going on with this album. Even albums I consider better don't have. You Belong With Me is the ultimate guilty pleasure. It's such a corny 2000s story, but it just has that X-Factor effect that makes it leaps and bounds ahead of similar songs released today. Obviously, its weakest aspect is the writing, but she was 18 when this album came out, and younger when a majority of these songs were written, and even then, a handful of them are truly exceptional. It wasn't until Red came around she became a master songwriter. Everyone needs time to grow. I love The Foundation and Twang, but of course Fearless earned its Grammy. It's one of the strongest sophomore albums of the 2000s and one of the most iconic albums ever. I honestly can't believe how polarizing Golden Hour is. Many view it as this bold, risky masterpiece, and some just see it as a pretty boring album. I'm personally a bit in between. It wasn't really a bold risk instrumentally, as it came out when this song was #1 for a year. But on the other hand, the writing for this album is so strong, it's ridiculous. Everyone loves to admire the production of this, but not enough is paid attention to the songwriting, which overall might be even stronger than pageant material, by a hair. Songs like Slow Burn and Space Cowboy are some of the strongest written songs I've ever seen. They are simply beautiful, and they have an advantage of being compelling stories told in a way casual fans can so easily enjoy. And if pure fun is what you want, the album's got you with songs like High Horse and Butterflies. These are really strong gems with hints of cleverness sprinkled throughout it. I do have to give extra points for being a complete departure from her previous work and making it work, unlike The Owl. I think it has its missteps, but it is a masterful blend of intellectualism and fun. Did it deserve its Grammy? Nope. Golden Hour is great, but come on. Port St. Joe is an actual masterpiece which does everything Golden Hour does but takes it one step further. I'll review it soon. Don't worry. Port St. Joe, that is. Golden Hour is whatever because everyone on planet Earth has talked about it. Now here is how you push the bounds of what country music can be. A Sailor's Guide to Earth is just fantastic, and it had the means of both being a bold risk and a statement to the industry, saying he doesn't want to be a savior to an industry who sticks to a mold. It was far more effective in that statement than Sound and Fury ever was. There honestly isn't anything like this, a smooth blend of country and jazz, which is something I actually have craved, and Sturgill absolutely delivered. Welcome to Earth is one of the most bizarre yet one of the most compelling intros I've ever seen for an album. Its tempo change is so abrupt and yet feels so natural after constant listens. Despite being so distinct from the past two other albums, the writing quality of Sturgill has stayed the same, from the bop of Sea Stories to the lightning fast Call to Arms. It's not my favorite Sturgill album, but despite being some of his lowest, it still manages to be fantastic, which is a testament to his level of artistry. I know Van Leer Rose is considered one of the greatest country albums of all time, but I don't care. With that said, Van Leer Rose is phenomenal. Now this album may not seem to hold up to modern standards, but it's kinda like how revolutionary Toy Story was, airing for the first time in 1995. This was the first bold risk in modern country music, with this great blend of rock and country. We were just getting out of the first neo-traditional renaissance, and a lot of people were still clinging to that age. And here you have this unique, refreshing take on country, blending the classic sound of Loretta Lynn and the rock sound of Jack White. I'm not that familiar with his work, I only really know him for that semi-decent Bond song from that terrible movie. But here they are both fantastic, the most widely known song being Portland, Oregon, which dives deep into a slope of drama I really don't feel like getting into. But it's just such a fun, naughty song that takes up the entire space it inhabits in a sense. My personal favorite track is Family Tree, which is so petty and pretty provocative. I like petty songs, don't judge me. Even though I wouldn't classify this as a personal favorite of mine, it provided a revolutionary path for how artists can truly define the meaning of country music. How in the world is Uncaged by Zac Brown this good? Van Leer Rose provided a platform for people pushing the bounds of country music, but Uncaged is that platform pushed to the absolute limit, and it is amazing. I'll clarify, this album isn't going to be for everyone, it's a fun album more than anything. And even then, there are so many admirable traits about it. The vocal production of this is some of the best I've ever seen. Everything, and I mean every harmonious note, is given the utmost texture. Talk about underrated masterpieces. This is as underrated as it gets. It is everything The Owl should have been, taking so many risks, going down several avenues, yet at the center is everything great about Zac Brown Band and country music in general. I didn't really talk about it in the Owl video because it puts that album to shame when looking at what could have been. You have Latin fusion, heartland rock, smooth jazz, and it all fits together and keeps a consistent tone despite all its departures. It shouldn't work, but it does. I'm shuddering at all it took to create such a phenomenal work of art. I know we all look at You Get What You Give as the foundation, but this album is just as strong, maybe even stronger. I'm still working on ranking all the Zac Brown Band albums. It absolutely deserved its win. The competition wasn't even close to it. Please check this out because music this good deserves to be listened The rest of these albums are truly in a league of their own. With the exception of Troubadour, I wouldn't necessarily call the past few albums really country, but the top 4 truly hone in what makes this genre so special, starting with Alison Krauss and the Union Station's Lonely Runs Both Ways. This is such a sonically rich album. Alison Krauss's delivery is simply beautiful, and its equally soothing and rich acoustic accompaniment allow for one of the finest album experiences I've ever seen. It's a master bluegrass album. The production of this one is so clear, which is shocking, especially when comparing it to albums that came out 3 or 4 years ago whose production isn't as good as this. My absolute favorite parts are in the instrumental moments where you can simply just take in all the richness and picture the story from just the instrumentals alone on Union House Branch, a trait carried into albums like Heartache Medication. It tells a crushing yet beautiful story of love and loss, and it progresses throughout the entire album. It's melancholy yet so beautiful. I haven't listened to all the albums it was nominated against, but I'm familiar with all of their work, and I think it's safe to say this stunning album absolutely deserved it. Country music doesn't get much better than this.
Let's welcome them out, Ira and Charlie the Louvin Brothers.
By far my favorite new listen on this marathon was this gorgeous tribute to the Louvin brothers. Livin', Lovin', Losin' is everything Timeless should have been, giving nothing but admiration to an iconic duo in the golden age of country. Now, I'm not gonna act like I'm a fan of the Louvin brothers or I know a lot about them, I don't whatsoever. But this album tells me a lot. Its great novelty is that every song on this is a duet, pairing equally harmonizing or unlikely duos together. People like Merle Haggard, Dolly Parton, and James Taylor were along for the project. Even Dierks Bentley, hot off the press of his debut album, really showing off the potential which would later manifest into Up on the Ridge. It's a gospel album, so chances are you won't find as much enjoyment as I do, but I didn't even notice that on my initial listen. I was taken in by all the richness and nostalgic instrumental styles. Timeless does something where they play with their own instrumental style, and I thought it sort of failed at that. Here it keeps a consistent tone and has some artists who have never dug deep into this sound jump into new waters and have an absolute blast. I honestly forgot what true country sounded like on my initial listen, which is shocking and shows how far the genre has gone since then, and that totally isn't a bad thing. Artists like Zac Brown and Sturgill have pushed the genre in bold directions, which are great, but it's always nice to hear and reminisce about the greatness this wonderful genre has. Here is a timeless classic that absolutely lives up to its reputation. The Dixie Chicks' Home is just a masterpiece. This is an album that is capable of an entire spectrum of emotions: happiness, sadness, anger, and is simply the Dixie Chicks at the top of their game. At this point, we all knew their formula. They were at such a point of stardom that they easily could have had their own 1989 moment and transition into pop, but the fact that they stayed the course of what defines them is one of the many reasons I have nothing but the utmost respect for one of the greatest country music groups in history. Up on the Ridge is simply a good bluegrass album. Home is honestly a contender for the greatest bluegrass album. It is an album capable of spreading ideals and beliefs in the only way possible: through country music. Everything comes off with the utmost sincerity and respect. Truly one of the grandest country albums ever made. From the rapid-fire white trash wedding to the emotional tear-jerking A Home, to one of the most powerful dedications to our soldiers with Travelin' Soldier. I've seen some really good ones over the years, but Travelin' Soldier is just beautiful and shows how grateful and selfless this trio is. I know they didn't write it, but the delivery in this shows off those emotions so well. I don't know what more is to be said about this album. It is the absolute peak of this trio as musicians. It was paired against some tough competition, but I'm glad it got its award. It is a work of art they haven't topped since.
It's time for the moment you've been waiting for!
Yeah, it's Traveler. What else could it be? I know it seems like a safe choice for the #1 spot, but Chris Stapleton absolutely deserves it. This is an album that is far more than the sum of its parts, and it really was a statement to the Nashville industry who was shoving the worst country music down our throats, saying, "We refuse this. We deny this." Traveler represents everything good this genre stood for in the bro era. I'm not one to lavish great vocals if I don't find the writing or instrumentals good. Thankfully, Chris Stapleton flies past this issue with some of the most sonically powerful and strongest writing in all of mainstream country. Dave Cobb, the producer, created a masterpiece with this album. Without him, chances are this album wouldn't have been as powerful as it is. The songs range from great to near flawless, not a single bad track. I know people with stubborn pride like to write this off because it's modern and love to cling to the past, but modern doesn't automatically mean inferior. Traveler easily surpasses some of the most iconic country albums in the past 50 years. His vocal performance on it is pulse-pounding, unparalleled by anyone in country. Don't debate me on that, you know it's true. Works of genius such as this only come around once a lifetime, so if you have yet to listen to this album, What have you been doing the past 5 years? This is a raw, emotionally driven masterpiece that is waiting for you. I think I can collectively say it deserved its Grammy over pageant material given its thematic purpose in the past decade of country, and in my humble opinion, the greatest recipient of the Grammy Award for Best Country Album.